The Season 5 Limbus Pass has been finally revealed in its entirety, and with it we have gotten a total of 6 new E.G.O skills for us to use against the newly added Bloodfiend enemies of Canto 7. All of these skills are unique and interesting, and in today's video I want to go over each and every one of them and review their effectiveness. Coming into Season 5 I had high hopes for these E.G.O skills, and you'll have to watch until the end of the video to see if those expectations were met. This time around, the E.G.O skills come in the form of 3 sets of 2 skills. We have a Rupture E.G.O set in Lasso, an old curse-inflicting E.G.O set in Hexnail, and a brand new powerful set of 2 Bleed WoW tier E.G.Os in Yearning Mircalla. We'll go through each of these sets in order, starting with Lasso. Lasso is a Rupture E.G.O skill set, so it's very important that the right sinners get the E.G.Os. The 2 lucky winners this time are Faust and Honglu. Faust is a great pick, as she has a powerful Rupture identity in 7 Association Faust, who might not be the best in her team, but is still a respectable Rupture damage dealer with a count-neutral skill. Honglu, on the other hand, is a bit of a different story. When we filter his identities by Rupture, you might think he has a lot of options, but in reality Honglu struggles greatly in terms of Rupture identities. If you want him on your team, you're forced to play either the identity with 0 Rupture count that only really works as a filler if you don't have anyone better, or the identity that is designed to literally ruin your entire game plan. However, Honglu being bad is a story for another day. Just know that Lasso could have been given to a lot of other sinners and yielded better results. Now let's actually analyze the skills themselves. We'll start with Lasso Faust, the first free E.G.O of this Limbus Pass. Lasso Faust is a 3 coin gluttony skill, with a base power of 4 and a coin power of 2. That coin power gets buffed up to 5 when the sum of Fausts and the enemy's speeds is 6 or more and against enemies with 14 Rupture. The skill also gets 1 attack weight if there is a 4 skill Gluttony or Last Resonance. The coins of this skill are pretty simple, with the first one inflicting 2 Rupture count and the second and third inflicting a total of 4 Rupture potency. The corrosion variant of the skill is also pretty notable, as it gains 1 coin power over the Awakening E.G.O, retains the same coin power conditionals, and has 3 attack weight without any setup. The corrosion variant does however inflict 1 less Rupture count, and loses the 2 Rupture completely on its last coin, subbing it for 1 Lasso and more damage. Lasso is the new debuff added with this series of E.G.O skills, and it's yet another Rupture adjacent effect that helps the stacking process. Lasso inflicts Rupture potency equal to the enemy's speed at turn end, and then inflicts 1 bind next turn and lowers its count by 1. The Rupture gain is kept at 5, and the bind infliction makes it difficult to get a lot of value for this effect, but it's a great way to inflict a little more Rupture passively, which is something that is always appreciated. Lasso Faust's passive is pretty bad though. If Faust attacks, staggers or kills an enemy, she inflicts 1 Rupture count against 2 random enemies. This effect sadly doesn't stack. I don't think that Rupture is anywhere near the level of Burn in the way that the effect can be passed around enemies with on-kill effects, and the archetype itself just kind of works best on bosses anyways, so this passive very rarely gets to do much. Even in Mirror Dungeons, which is pretty much the only place where this effect can proc, it's not impactful, as in that mode, +1 count for E.G.O resources is kind of a poor trade. My main gripe with Lasso Faust is that the Awakening variant feels very much like a third skill of an identity. Unironically, I could see this skill without the attack weight being slapped onto one of the old Rupture 3 stars, and that's not a good thing. Lasso Faust reaches a maximum power of 19, which is far too low for an E.G.O skill, and it doesn't even deal any good damage. Not to mention, it's not even count neutral. This is literally just a 4th skill for 7 Faust that you can slot in instead of her skill 1 if you have a ton of resources. The one saving grace for the skill comes in the form of the Stress Pin 4 Corrosion variant, as it actually reaches a decent 25 power, fixes its Rupture count issue, and inflicts 2 Lasso instead of 1, and increases the bonus damage cap. All of that is great, but of course using the Corrosion variant eats up a lot of E.G.O resources, and uptying such a mid E.G.O to 4 is a bold use of your materials to say the least. I would rate Lasso Faust a strong 4 out of 10. It's pretty bad compared to most E.G.Os, but at least you can slot it in for a skill 1. Next up we have Lasso Faust's brother, Lasso Honglu. This E.G.O skill has the exact same base and coin power as Faust, with the exact same coin power conditionals. However, Honglu is a whole step ahead, as he has 4 coins instead of 3. Honglu's Lasso also has 2 attack weight with no setup. The second coin of the effect simply inflicts 2 stacks of Lasso, while the next 2 have some more complicated effects. The third coin inflicts 1 Rapture count for every 2 Gluttony Resonance during the turn, capping out at 3. Often this effect will result in Honglu inflicting 2 count, which makes his Lasso go -2 in count. The fourth and last coin of the skill randomly inflicts bleed and rapture equal to half of Honglu's speed between the enemy's hit. Both effects cap out at 3 potency. Once again, the corrosion variant of this E.G.O is pretty good as well, as it gains 1 base and coin power, but loses 1 coin. Lasso still retains its 2 attack weight, but it inflicts 3 stacks of Lasso instead of 2, and a stable 2 rapture and bleed count instead of relying on resonance. This makes Lasso Honglu consistently go -1 in count when using the corrosion variant. The last coin of the skill has a different effect here, as it deals more damage for every bleed and rapture on target, with the bonus capping out at 30% for each. The passive of Lasso Honglu is similar to that of Lasso Faust. If an enemy is killed by bleed or rapture, another random enemy gets inflicted with 2 Lasso and Honglu gets 1 haste next turn. The similarity between this passive and Faust passive is that they're both kind of useless. Relying on rapture for human kills is once again a bad idea, and while using bleed for kills is much more reasonable, the Lasso effect is tied to rapture, meaning it doesn't synergize with bleed at all. Realistically, this passive can be rephrased as when an enemy is killed by bleed, gain 1 haste next turn. So it's not exactly amazing, let's just say. Unlike Faust, who gets a lot of buffs to her E.G.O skill at Strength Spin 4, Honglu doesn't really benefit from threat spinning too much. The Awakening variant gets more bleed and rapture infliction, while the Corrosion variant gets an attack weight conditional and both get HP healing down, which aims to counter some of the new Bloodfiend enemies directly. Still, I wouldn't call these buffs deserving of 90 shards and 130 threat. I would rank Lasso Honglu a solid 5 out of 10. I'd say it's slightly better than Faust just due to more Lasso infliction and better offensive parameters at Threat Spin 3. Next, we have the second set of E.G.O skills, that being Hexnail. But real quick before I start going over these 2 E.G.Os, I just want to say that a large portion of my viewers unsubscribed. If you're enjoying the video or find yourself coming back to my content, make sure to subscribe to my channel. The YouTube algorithm works in mysterious ways, and every subscriber helps my channel a lot. Without further ado, let's get back to the video. Hexnail features 2 new additions to the E.G.O pool, those being a 10th level E.G.O for Sinkler and a high level E.G.O for Rodion. Hexnail Sinkler shows up earlier than Rodion, and is also the second free E.G.O of the pass, so we'll start with him. Hexnail Sinkler is a 2 coin pierce envy skill, with 7 base power and 6 coin power at Threat Spin 3. If the skill is part of a 4 skill envy resonance, it gains 1 more attack weight, bringing it up to 2. On head's hit with the first coin, Sinkler inflicts 2 bleed. The second coin has a lot more going on, as it inflicts 2 curse and then inflicts 1 more curse per 3 negative effects on the target, except curse and nails, capping out at 2. It then inflicts 3 nails, and on head's hit it also inflicts 2 bind next turn. After the attack, the enemy's curse stacks get procced twice instantly. To fully understand Hexnail, I will have to explain curse, which is an effect that has been tied to this E.G.O ever since Hexnail Faust at Limbus Company's release. The way curse works is that it inflicts an enemy with a random debuff every turn. The effect can choose from 4 debuffs: 1 attack power down, 1 defense power down, 2 offense level down, and 2 defense level down. The effect is applied next turn at turn end, which is also when curse loses 1 count. This designed debuff spam, coupled with Sinkler's ability to instantly activate curse after using his E.G.O, makes Hexnail Sinkler a great debuffing E.G.O, as if you get lucky it can double down on the offensive debuffs, resulting in the enemies being severely crippled for a turn. Sinkler's Corrosion E.G.O is pretty similar to his Awakening, as it also has 2 coins, but they're negative now, and the skill has 3 attack weight. You get the same debuffs as with the Awakening variant, but now the 4 curse does not require setup. This makes Corrosion Hexnail even better at crippling enemies than the base form, but negative coins are a pain to deal with, so you might struggle to use this E.G.O in real combat. Hexnail Sinkler's passive is actually pretty good, as it gives him Clash power up and Defense power up if he has a negative effect. These buffs are further supplemented by 1 protection plus 3 negative effects on Sinkler up to 2 stacks. Overall, much like with Faust, Hexnail Sinkler revolves around balancing debuffs on enemies and self, and his value is actually pretty high. However, he does have some notable drawbacks. First of all, Curse itself is not a consistent debuff, as it can inflict something like Defense power down, which is a far less desirable debuff than, say, Offense power down. The skill itself also has the same problem as Lasso Faust, as it only rolls up to 19, which is not enough to comfortably beat clashes. Outside of that, Hexnail Sinkler is a pretty decent debuffing tool that can help newer players beat tough enemies, but will not help those who already have every ID. However, at Stress Pin 4, Hexnail gets much better. By spending some shards and shred, you allow Sinkler to roll up to 21 with his skill, which helps his offense a little bit, but most importantly, his debuffing effects become even stronger. He now inflicts 1 curse for every 2 debuffs on the enemy, instead of 3, and at 4 curse, he also inflicts 1 Clash power down. Overall, between 2 instant procs of curse, a highly likely old stack of curse proccing last turn, and the effects of the skill itself, Stress Pin 4 Hexnail Sinkler can comfortably support his team with a Clash power advantage of 2 to 3 points. This is an invaluable effect whenever you're running a team that doesn't clash well, or are facing an extremely powerful enemy. Oh, and also this effect can be spread to 1 more enemy than earlier, thanks to the attack weight condition buff. I rate Hexnail Sinkler a solid 7 out of 10. It lacks a lot of power to be considered meta, but it's definitely a uniquely potent weakening tool that doesn't rely on its teammates. Next up we have Hexnail Rodion, an E.G.O skill that has come to dethrone the previous Queen of Healing. Hexnail Rodion is a 2-coin /envy skill with a base power of 6 and a coin power of 8. This skill has 3 attack weight, and after it hits, Rodion heals herself and 2 other allies for 12.5% of her max HP. That healing is further increased by 2.5% for every 2 negative effects on the target ally, up to a bonus cap of 7.5%. The coins of the skill inflict bleed, curse and nails, as is expected from a Hexnail E.G.O. Much like with Sinkler, Hexnail Rodion's Corrosion variant is a bit better effect-wise, but you have to put up with negative coins. The base healing of the skill is increased to 15%, but the bonus healing is switched for 1 offense level up per 2 negative effects. The coins of the skill also inflict bleed count, making Hexnail better for bleed. However, that's where the similarities with Sinkler end, as Rodion's passive is much more offense-oriented. Iron Stake Against the Heart allows Rodion to inflict 1 defense level down and 2 additional bleed when inflicting bleed with her skills. This lets the rest of her team deal slightly more damage, and Rodion's bleed infliction is also passively increased. On top of these effects, whenever an ally takes damage from an enemy's attack, that enemy is inflicted with 1 stack of curse, up to 2 times per turn. Overall, Hexnail Rodion is much simpler than Sinkler. She can deal okay damage with her attack weight, and the effective healing output of this E.G.O is actually higher than that of Pursuance, as Hexnail results in a maximum of 60% of Rodion's HP as healing, while Pursuance only results in 50. The passive is also pretty nice for bleed, but as of now, Rodion is a subpar sinner choice for bleed teams, and we will have to wait for a good Rodion bleed AD to make use of this passive. Stress Pin 4 gives Hexnail Rodion bigger numbers in all categories. She gets 2 base power, 15% base healing, the bonus healing goes up to 2.5% per 1 debuff instead of 2, and the bonus cap goes up to 10%. The skill also gets to heal 1 more ally at 4+ Envy Resonance, making Hexnail Rodion a pretty good team healing skill in Envy heavy teams. All of the debuffs inflicted with the skill also get more stacks, except the bleed count infliction of her corrosion variant, which stays at 2. All in all, Rodion might not be the perfect clasher like Pursuance, but what she lacks in power she more than makes up for in healing. With the addition of enemy unbreakable coins and the new identities inflicting bleed on themselves, you're going to find yourself actually using the bonus healing from this effect, and at Strespin 4, the healing even without the bonus can save your run. I would rate Rodion right next to Sinkler, at 7 out of 10. Next up, we have the third and last set of the Season 5 Limbus Pass, Yearning Mircalla. This set features 2 WoW tier 4 coin E.G.O skills that work around bleed and damage bonuses. The 2 E.G.Os in the set are one for Mircalla and one for Don. We'll start with Mircalla, as he appears earlier than Don. Yearning Mircalla is a 4 coin last E.G.O skill with 5 base power and 4 coin power. This skill has a fixed attack rate of 1, so it's meant to be used against bosses. If the target has 6 bleed, the coin power of the skill rises up to 5, and for 3 turns after using Yearning Mircalla loses 10 SP at turn end. The first 2 coins of the skill inflict 2 bleed each, and then at 4+ highest resonance, they activate bleed on the enemy. This works in the same way that it would when the enemy flips a coin. They take damage by potency and lose 1 count. The third coin is unbreakable, and it inflicts a new debuff called Rose Wedge, which we'll get to very soon. If hitting after winning a clash, this coin inflicts 2 more count of the effect. The fourth and last coin is also unbreakable, and this one activates the target's bleed 1 to 3 times, depending on the highest resonance. If you have a high enough resonance to activate the first 2 coins, it will also be high enough to activate bleed 3 times with this one. Without taking Rose Wedge into consideration, this skill is already very unique and pretty powerful. I remember a comment under one of my videos saying that every status effect wants to be like sinking now, and that we'll get a bleed deluge in this season. And well, this is pretty close to that. At a 4 skill resonance, Yearning Mircalla procs bleed 5 times on the enemy, which allows you to finish off a boss that has a lot of bleed. This effect obviously puts a lot of strain on bleed count, however it's not too bad considering that Mircalla has one of the best bleed count inflicting identities in R-Corp Mircalla. Yearning Mircalla also fixes a large issue of Armor Soul's kit, which is the fact that he lacks pierce damage with his skills, and mostly relies on Slash, which is the worst damage type for bleed. Being a pierce last skill, Yearning Mircalla can deal a lot of physical damage to bleed team's priority targets, and its E.G.O resource cost synergizes with R-Corp Mircalla quite effectively, as well. Overall, this E.G.O complements an OK bleed identity well enough to make it top tier if you play around using Yearning Mircalla. But of course, the value of the skill goes deeper, with the new Rose Wedge effect that it introduces. Rose Wedge is a bleed adjacent status effect that caps out at 10 potency and 4 count. The potency is increased by 1 whenever the inflicted enemy takes 10 bleed damage. As long as the enemy is inflicted with Rose Wedge, whenever they are inflicted with bleed or unique bleed, they are inflicted with 2 more bleed potency and inflict 1 bleed on the attacker, up to 5 times per turn. If the potency rises to 10, the target is also inflicted with 1 bleed count whenever the effect procs, basically giving you 5 free bleed count during that turn. At turn end, this effect loses 1 count, and if the count is at 1 or the potency is at 10, at the end of combat, the effect is lost, and the enemy who was inflicted with it takes last damage equal to 10 times the effect's potency. This effect also further synergizes with Bloodfiends by increasing Blood Fist and dealing damage to all enemies whenever a unit with this effect dies. Rose Wedge is a pretty incredible effect, and it being inflicted by such an awesome E.G.O skill only makes Yearning Mircalla that much better. The corrosion variant this time around is not something I would recommend using though. On use, this skill deals damage to all allies and enemies, and considering that the E.G.O has 1 attack weight and seems to synergize with R-Corp Mircalla the best, you will probably use it on bosses, meaning the allies take much more effective damage than the single boss. If Mircalla is at less than half of his HP, he inflicts and activates bleed on allies instead, and then heals HP equal to the damage dealt to allies by bleed. This already is a pretty big sabotage, especially when fighting the new Bloodfiend enemies, as chipping away at your team like that leaves them open to mass staggers by enemy unbreakable coins. But Corrosion Urine Mircalla Mersault also loses out on the bleed procs from his first and second coin, opting to inflict bleed on self and target instead. The third coin does however inflict additional Rose Wedge potency compared to the Awakening variant, so this skill is a bit better at inflicting the effect, though it's not necessarily that important when using a bleed team. Another problem of the Corrosion variant is that even though it effectively costs less SP than the normal version, all of that SP loss is thrown at Mersault instantly, which makes hitting all 4 heads a very difficult task for him, crippling the clash power of the skill. The TLDR of all these disadvantages is to just not use the Corrosion variant of Urine Mircalla Mersault, no matter how much you need that 4 Rose Wedge potency. The passive of the skill is powerful as well, as it allows Mersault to heal off bleed damage, up to 10 per turn, and inflict more bleed against targets with Rose Wedge, which further supports Arcorp Mersault, who normally struggles with potency infliction. As Respin 4, Mersault gets to increase his coin power by 1 more from his conditional, and the Rose Wedge count infliction goes up by 1. His last coin also spreads out its excess damage among other targets, which is a nice effect, but not super useful for such an E.G.O skill in my opinion. Overall, Urine Mircalla Mersault is incredibly powerful, and definitely an E.G.O skill that I would recommend learning to use well. I rate it a solid 9 out of 10. I am super stingy with 10s and the skill isn't perfect, but it's absolutely a top tier bleed damage tool. Last but certainly not least, we have the E.G.O skill that you see every time you boot up the game. That's right, now is the time for Urine Mircalla Don Quixote. This E.G.O is another 4 coin Pierce Lust skill, but that's where its similarities with Mersault end, as it fulfills a very different role. Don's HP does not fall below 1 when using this skill, and all of its coins are unbreakable, meaning you can lose a clash with Urine Mircalla and still hit your enemies, much like every enemy in Canto 7. If the target has 10 bleed, the coin power of the skill goes up by 1. Also, the clash power is increased by 1 for every 100 Blood Fist consumed by Don, but we can't use that for now. If the current Blood Fist is lower than 75, the skill inflicts 1 bleed with each of its coins, which allows you to get your Blood Fist up quicker. After using the skill, Don loses 10 SP at turn end for 3 turns, much like Mersault. The first 3 coins of the skill simply gain more damage per shared consumed Blood Fist. The second coin requires 100 Blood Fist to be consumed for its effect, and the third requires 200. The fourth coin also deals more damage per Blood Fist consumed when above 300, but it also inflicts yet another new effect, Polydipsec Rose. This effect is inflicted based on the highest last absolute resonance, and maxes out at 3. Before we move on to Corrosion, let's take a look at Polydipsec Rose. This effect stacks up to 5, and at 10 plus bleed potency, this effect deals 1% of the enemy's max HP as last damage, up to 30. It loses 1 stack at turn end, and stacking the effect only increases the amount of turns it stays in effect. I wouldn't necessarily call this effect broken, but you can look at it as 30 stacks of burn against late game bosses. It's free damage, sure, but not a lot of it, and the damage is applied slowly. The Corrosion variant of the skill only has 2 coins, and both of them have minus 10 power on a 30 base power skill. If Urine Mircalla Awakening is all about damage, the Corrosion version is all about bleed infliction. If the skill is used at less than 150 Blood Fist, it inflicts 1 bleed with every hit, and at less than 100 Blood Fist, the first coin of the skill inflicts 10 bleed. The second coin is akin to the first one of the Awakening version, but it also heals Don by 50% of damage dealt. Urine Mircalla Don's passive is also pretty powerful, as it heals her for 1 SP whenever 10 bleed damage occurs, up to 10 times per turn. Strespin 4 helps this E.G.O a lot, as it increases both the attack weight and the coin power cap of the skill, and both of these things lead to even more damage being inflicted on the enemies. Also, Don gets to inflict an additional stack of Polydipsec Rose. Urine Mircalla Don is pretty cool. she deals a ton of damage to multiple enemies, and her typing is handcrafted to perfectly counter the enemies of Kanto 7. The problem with the skill for now is that Don still doesn't have a Bloodfiend identity, so she can't effectively fuel this E.G.O. However, when we eventually get the fated Sancho Don Quixote, the skill will show its true power. Its potential damage is incredibly high, and the additional damage for its unique effect might not be incredibly high, but will equate to a bunch of free damage over the course of a fight, which isn't bad. The passive though is what seals the deal for me. It's incredibly straightforward and very effective. With this passive online, Don does not have to suffer the drawbacks of using your name Mircalla, and can easily keep herself at 45 SP no matter what kind of E.G.O spam you're forcing her to do. The one thing I must say is that a lot of the stuff I'm saying about this E.G.O is pure speculation, because using it in actual combat has proven to be difficult due to the current lack of Bloodfist IDs. I'm sure I will be able to give you a mod-tested review when more IDs come out, but for now I'll give Rodion Mircalla Don a solid 9 out of 10 once again. It's a lot of damage, and that's always welcome here. Overall, the E.G.O skills of the Season 5 Limbus Pass are pretty interesting. Both of the Lasso skills are decent, but really don't change the game. They mainly serve as ways to inflict the Lasso effect, which seems like an actually decent way to inflict Rupture passively whenever you're going for that 15-3 stack. The Hex Nails are pretty good though. We have a huge debuff E.G.O that can make fights massively easier, and a healing E.G.O that might not rival Fluid Sec, but can still come close, which isn't something that a lot of E.G.O skills can say. And finally, both Rodion and Mircalla E.G.Os deal a ton of damage, and work well in bleed teams, with one of them serving as a single target nuke and the other one being a multi-target nuke. I'd say the best E.G.O of the pass is Rodion Mircalla Mersault for now. And funnily enough, this one is free, so you don't have to fork over your hard-earned cash to play around with the new strongest E.G.O skills. I hope you found this video interesting, and if you did, make sure to leave a like. If you disagree with my opinions or want to add something, feel free to leave a comment. I read each and every one, and if you make a good point, I will gladly enter any kind of discussion with you down in the comment section. If you find yourself coming back to my videos, you should consider subscribing, as if you watched until the end of the video, you might as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye!